Hello, everyone. Welcome to the very first episode of our Ethics in Fiction. And this series will focus on stories that allow us to explore ethical questions that would be difficult or impossible to safely experience ourselves. You see, fiction gives us distance. It lets us examine fear, loyalty, justice, corruption, and sacrifice without having to live through the consequences. The series isn't about deciding whether characters are heroes or villains. It isn't about finding one correct answer. Instead, we'll ask questions like, why did they make the choices they did? What values were they trying to protect? And what does their story reveal about us? Today, we are beginning with one of the greatest legal thrillers ever made, The Firm, made in 1993. And our topic is When Every Choice Betrays Someone. So, this movie is about Mitch McDeere. He's a brilliant young attorney, fresh out of law school, but buried deep in student debt. And suddenly, he's offered what seems like the perfect life: a prestigious law firm, an incredible salary, luxury house, expensive cars, everything he's ever wanted. But something doesn't feel right. As Mitch learns more about the firm, he discovers that success has a price. The firm presents dangerous organized crime figures. Partners disappear. Employees who ask too many questions end up dead. And the FBI approaches Mitch with a demand: help expose the firm's crimes or risk becoming part of them. Suddenly, every option seems wrong. At first glance, this seems like a legal thriller. But underneath, it is an ethical pressure cooker. So our central question is, what should Mitch McDeere do, and why? One simple decision quickly becomes dozens of different ethical questions. Should he protect attorney-client privilege, report criminal activity, obey the law, protect innocent clients, protect his wife, save himself, expose corruption, or stay loyal to his professional ethics? Every choice protects one value while sacrificing another. So, in the end, what ethical decision did Mitch ultimately face? Was it breaking attorney client privilege, turning over evidence involving criminal clients, reporting corruption inside his own law firm, or all of the above? What do you think? For those of you who've watched this film, you'll know that the answer is all of the above. You see, most fictional ethical dilemmas present one difficult choice. The firm layers them. We have professional ethics, personal loyalty, survival, justice, legal responsibility, family. And every solution creates another ethical problem. And this makes this the perfect introduction to using fiction in an ethics classroom. So let's start with a brief character analysis. When we're looking at the character of Mitch McDeere, we look at a few of his different goals. He wants to build a successful career, escape poverty, protect his wife, live honestly, and preserve his future. But he also has some fears: the risk of going to prison, death, betraying his profession, losing his identity, becoming like the very people he despises. When we look at some of his core values, he values justice, professional responsibility, his own personal integrity, loyalty, independence, and like many people, he has flaws. Mitch initially believes intelligence alone can solve every problem that he's faced with, and he underestimates how slowly unethical compromises can accumulate. He also assumes that he can beat the system, and that confidence both helps him and puts him in extraordinary danger. So, this discussion is not simply about good versus evil. It's a collision between legitimate ethical values. So, let's examine a few of these competing perspectives. So, perspective one, the rule of law, that criminal organizations must be stopped. Protecting attorney-client privilege should never become a shield for ongoing criminal conduct. Justice sometimes requires exposing wrongdoing. In this perspective, we ask questions like, who is being harmed? How many victims remain if nobody acts? Does silence become complicity? Our second perspective revolves around professional duty. Attorneys serve a unique role, and people can only receive fair and legal representation if clients can trust their lawyers. Attorney-client privilege isn't designed to protect criminals, it's designed to protect the legal system itself. Because if lawyers cannot keep confidences, then everyone loses trust. So questions that we might ask here are, can justice exist without confidential legal counsel? Or does violating privilege damage everyone, not just criminals? We could also examine this from the perspective of virtue ethics. So instead of asking what rule applies, virtue ethics would ask, what kind of person should Mitch become? Should he focus on courage, maintaining his integrity, making the wisest decision, loyalty to his company, seeking justice? You see, no single virtue solves every problem, and sometimes these virtues themselves create conflict. We could also examine this from the idea of consequentialism, where consequences matter. Which decision prevents the greatest harm? Would exposing the law firm save lives? Would remaining silent allow future victims? Or would violating privilege create long-term damage to the legal system? These are all difficult questions that we have to ask when assessing the potential consequences of each choice. We could also examine this story from the idea of care ethics. And care ethics shifts the attention from institutions to the relationships between characters. Mitch is not making his decision in isolation. His wife is endangered. Friends end up becoming involved. And other employees are trapped by blackmail and other problems. So care ethics might ask, who depends on you? Who is vulnerable? How do your decisions affect the people closest to you? We could also look at this from a rights-based perspective, because every one of us, everyone involved, possesses individual rights. There's the clients, the victims, the lawyers, the citizens, and the government. The challenge becomes determining which rights deserve protection when those rights conflict. The firm quietly asks several deeper questions. Is professional loyalty more important than justice? Should legal ethics have exceptions? Can someone remain moral while participating in an immoral institution? Does accepting benefits from corruption eventually make us responsible for it? How much personal risk should someone accept to expose the wrongdoing of someone else? You see, all of these assumptions drive the story far more than the courtroom scenes. And this story isn't unique to lawyers. Many professions face similar ethical tensions. A physician balancing patient confidentiality against mandatory reporting. An accountant uncovering financial fraud inside their company could face similar issues. A cybersecurity professional that discovers illegal activity while also being bound by confidentiality agreements would be put in a similar situation. A therapist navigating confidentiality when there's a credible threat of harm to their patient. Or perhaps an employee who uncovers corruption but fears retaliation if they become the whistleblower. The specific laws differ, but the ethical structure often does not. So, this film focuses on several major choices, but ethically, there's also several additional possibilities worth exploring. Mitch could also seek independent legal counsel. He could document the evidence while minimizing unnecessary disclosure. He could negotiate protections for himself and his wife before cooperating. He could also resign immediately. However, that might not end the danger to his life. He could prioritize protecting innocent clients while exposing the criminal conduct. And each of these alternatives carries different costs. Ethics is not something that offers perfect solutions. Very often, there are a lot of different trade-offs involved. So as you consider this film, think about a few of these questions. Was Mitch justified in violating professional obligations if doing so prevented greater harm? Would your answer change if the clients were accused rather than clearly involved in organized crime? Does accepting money from an unethical organization make someone morally responsible before they personally commit wrongdoing? When professional duties conflict with public safety, which do you think should come first? How much personal risk should someone accept to expose corruption? And if you were in his position, would you have made the same choice if your spouse's life depended on it? Consider these questions and leave a comment in below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. When we think about all of these different ethical values that are in conflict, we have things like justice, where we have this emphasis on stopping organized crime in order to protect society. There's also the value of attorney-client privilege, which is essential for a functioning legal system. There's the idea of loyalty, with professionals owing duties to clients and colleagues. We also look at his integrity, remaining true to one's moral principles. This is also balanced with personal safety, because his ethical obligations do not erase legitimate concerns for one's own life or family. And there's also responsibility, because individuals may bear responsibility for institutions that they choose to remain a part of. When we look at these different ethical frameworks, we can consider what duties Mitch owed to his clients, his profession, or his society, and how those duties conflicted with each other. We could also consider which of his actions was likely to reduce the overall harm in the situation, and whether or not he chose correctly. We can also consider virtue ethics, and which of the choices he was faced with reflected practical wisdom, courage, honesty, and integrity. We can consider the care ethics and how Mitch weighed his obligations to his wife and other people who could be harmed, as well as rights-based ethics, when we ask which rights deserve priority when confidentiality, due process, and public safety collide. I want to hear from you. Have you ever felt trapped between two responsibilities where either choice carried a cost? At what point does compromise become complicity? And do you think that a person can remain ethical inside an unethical organization, or is there a point where they must leave? One reason the firm has endured is that its central conflict isn't really about lawyers. It's about what happens when every available choice demands a sacrifice. We all hope that if confronted with corruption, we'd immediately know the right thing to do. But ethical dilemmas rarely announce themselves that clearly. They arrive gradually through promotions and friendships, loyalty and fear, small compromises that give way to larger ones. Fiction gives us the chance to rehearse those moments before they happen in real life, not so that we can memorize every correct answer, but so we can become more aware of the values guiding our own decisions. Because ethical growth isn't about always choosing perfectly. It's about recognizing the conflicts, understanding the people involved, and becoming the kind of person who can navigate them with wisdom and integrity. Next time on Ethics and Fiction, we'll explore another story where human values collide and ask not who was right, but what their choices reveal about what it means to be human. Until then, keep asking difficult questions and keep seeking understanding.